2019 Bellingham mayor's race, where there were lots of issues of real importance to people, sort of, how are we going to turn downtown on and address affordable housing and create a sustainable building and business environment, and lots of people talking about homelessness, home affordability, taking action on renewable energy, finishing missing links on our trail systems and parks, sort of just this important work of sort of building the future city in the context of an era when we anticipate increased populations, et cetera. And then wham, first of the year. I wish I could remember the day I read in the newspaper about this emerging threat known as COVID-19. I think it was early January, presumably, when it sort of made it into the world press. But so all by way of saying that it's been different than anticipated, to put it mildly. I think sort of from the beginning, somebody asked me the other day whether I'm adjusting to this new normal, being mayor in the context of the plague. And I said, well, it's the only thing I've known. I haven't had another normal. So it's just been this pretty much from the beginning. I mean, January, I'd just begun. I'm giving too long an answer.
It's good. This is a conversation. That's kind of how we frame it. So that's why the questions are open-ended.
Well, all right, thanks. I started the job, and people that worked at City Hall in a long time, and people I know who were previous mayors, they said the new mayor sort of, it's a few months before things kind of settle down, because there are lots and lots of groups and organizations and people that want to have introductory meetings with the new mayor. And I was really enjoying that. And it was and January and February, I was sort of in the midst of all that. And it was meetings almost, not every night, but almost every night, and nonstop meetings from 8 to 5 every day, just continuous, meeting lots of folks. And then this looming presence of the plague, I shouldn't say plague, the pandemic, and then coming into focus by end of February. And by March, all thoughts were directed towards our emergency response. And that's when governors and mayors were all and executives signing the emergency proclamations so that we could more quickly respond to the emerging threat, and the organization of the Whatcom Unified Command structure with our jurisdictional partners. And so March and April were just intensely engaged in sort of constant COVID response.
One of the I'm hearing myself. That's tech problems. So one of the questions, and it's interesting, it's some of the feedback that we've heard with doing these chamber chats, is getting to know you, the person. And one of the frameworks that I use a lot is, during this time, like, we have to use compassion and kindness. And I'm curious, it's an aspect of leadership, but it's more introspective than leadership to your staff and your constituencies. But how are you handling this? So it's just kind of from that lens of compassion and kindness, which I think are two descriptors that we've heard you being described through years. Like, this isn't just through your current term, but you've had these descriptors attached to you for years. So I'm just kind of curious as to your approach.
Well, it's very much thanks for that question. You just show up every day, and and address all the things that are right in front of you. So I think I spent a lot of my life either looking backwards or looking forwards. Of course, I was present, but I think I just occupied a lot of my own internal mental time when I think back on it, sort of looking backwards or looking forwards, and as opposed to the third aspect, which is being present. And this job has required me to be very actively present. In some ways, it's a blessing because you don't really have time to be anxiety ridden about things. Which isn't to say I don't suffer from anxiety at times. It's just that I am so focused on the issue at hand so that's sort of how I get through it all. I'm just, there's meetings happening all the time that call for my participation and or direction. And so I guess I've been enormously comforted by the fact that I have this just really amazing, I'm able to collaborate with a lot of really amazing people who are talented and conscientious and competent and thoughtful. That's a word that comes up a lot. We aspire in each decision that we have to make to be as thoughtful as we can. And my experience is that when we engage that way, we make the best decisions we can in the moment. So that's sort of it, I guess. Just try to prioritize what's most important in the moment and be as thoughtful as we can in our decision making. And usually if you're surrounded by good people and you take that posture, then usually you feel as good as you can about the decisions that you make in pretty rapid order. Was that responsive to your question? I don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, it shows your approach, and that's, everyone can listen to our, the radio shows that we have in the community, read the newspapers. And one of the things we like to do is we have to humanize, right? Like we're all people walking around the earth trying to figure out the best solutions and the best answers to our problems. And I guess in that same vein, that collaborative approach, and you mentioned this earlier. So as the mayor of Whatcom's largest city, you mentioned unified command, and I'm going to add in the health department. What is your role with unified command and the health department?
So incident command structure and systems, as you know, we've all learned so much about these things in the last 6 months. That is, lay people. We've learned the word social distancing and certainly unified command, the jurisdictional entity of emergency response departments in the city who are most actively engaged in formal emergency response. And it's a structure that's made up of a number of partners: the city of Bellingham, the county of Whatcom, tribes, and then there's a number of supporting organizations that are affiliated. The port has a role in the economic response. A number of organizations have formed to deal with the food security response. There's all these different elements: the quarantine and isolation facilities response, the partnership with the hospital, the health department. Of course, the health department, through Washington state law, the Washington State Department of Health, and the county subpart, the Whatcom County Department of Health, they're all active partners and they all have critically important roles. So the structure that's been laid out at this point in time is we had a whole series of incident commanders. We've changed that structure to a one incident command, Scott McCreary, who came most recently from the port. And then above that, we have an executive board that sort of oversees the incident commander. And that includes Whatcom County Executive and myself as the mayor of Bellingham. We have weekly meetings where we sort of get a high-level report from the happenings out at Unified Command by and through the incident commander and what they're working on presently. So we then have partnership with the cities, a policy board that's made up of city mayors and council members, elected officials who we engage with. And through all of that, we're able to sort of understand emergent issues that we foresee coming that might require resources. I guess that's fundamentally the system in which I play a role, is trying to hear, we, the executive board, hear what prospective future needs are coming in from incident command and those that are actually working at Unified Command, and try to provide resources to them. So if it's working with our federal partners for funding, et cetera, or state partners and funding, we just try to create the resources to have as good a response to this crazy experience as we can. And it works. I think it's working as well as it can. Again, a lot of thoughtful, intelligent people working on that as well.
Yeah. So I want to kind of change or I guess move forward the conversation. Up to this point, a lot of it has been spent on the pandemic, which of course is the primary issue that we have that has caused some other issues. Being a chamber, we're of course very interested in the economic crisis that has kind of happened because of it. And so we've seen some local news, some larger employers in the county, Alcoa comes to mind, and clearly that wasn't just pandemic related. But we've seen some other small businesses mentioned potential closures. A few have made that announcement that they're no longer, they won't continue through the pandemic. And so what will you do to lift up our employers and businesses in Bellingham?
Great question. And I think so often during this experience, we've felt as though we're sort of between this proverbial rock and a hard place. You engage in the relaxation through the, safe opening for Washington and the various phases. And of course, it potentially has the effect of increasing the rate of the spread. You shelter in place in a protected fashion, and the economy, it's been a real complicated thing nationwide, worldwide, to respond to. The Jerome Powell, I believe his name was, the chair of the Federal Reserve, was on a program that I watched recently. I think it was 60 Minutes. And he was talking about and this relates to the local response. He said, in his view, the interview happened when we'd gone through these various federal stimulus iterations. I think at that point we were at like federal stimulus 4 and spending like $3 trillion sort of infused into our economy by different means: Paycheck Protection Program, block grants to states for unemployment, to mention only a couple obvious ones. His primary observation was that, and there's been a lot of rethinking about the effect of the currency makers infusing the system with money. There's an old view that was a bad thing to do, and a lot of people are rethinking that and recognizing, no, actually, currency makers doing that, arguably, it's a good thing. It'll have an effect on inflation, but it'll also save a lot of things. But his point was simply that, in his view, we needed to probably double that federal stimulus. So the prospect of another couple $1 trillion coming forward is um, going to be really fundamental in, I think, saving us, just broadly speaking. That'll all come through grants down to the city level. The big thing that's coming forward, which is an unknown, and we have people on the staff who are engaged with our lobbyists and in regular contact with our federal partners, congressionally and otherwise. And the word we're hearing is that there's a likelihood in the month of July that this HEROES Act money, which and municipal funding will come through. You'll recall there was a huge amount for the large cities that was given, and none of us in Whatcom County were eligible for it. And we think that there's going to be a breakthrough. House has already indicated support for it. The Senate's the question. And if they can compromise, and I think we have hope that they will, there's the prospect of significant money coming to, more money coming to cities, which we will then be able to have a broad authority to spend, which we can then take a portion of, presumably, and put it into economic grants. So there's one important thing that we are hoping that we can do. What we've done already locally is taken the city's already received through CARES Act funding $2.7 million. And we are wanting to spend it prudently. And in partnership with the county and the city, we've put together upwards of around $3 million potentially that we'll be able to use. We've convened a group in the city of Bellingham called the Bellingham Assistance Team, which just last week finalized a report basically coming up with criteria for how we're going to spend this limited amount of money that we've got. So there's that sort of thing that we're doing. We are looking at right-of-ways. We're trying to be as smart as we can, working with merchants in the downtown core and in Fairhaven. I know that doesn't resolve issues for all the businesses in town that are suffering, but that's sort of the public face of our community is our downtown, and trying to be responsive to all the merchants down there and allow them to use our right-of-ways, our sidewalks, and our streets so they can go open up for the summer and create more distancing. We're working with the economic, regional partners through Don Goldberg and others at the port, Small Business Development Center. I know, Guy, you've been very active in helping people.
A lot of me.
I'll bet. Well, thank you for the work you've been doing. It's remarkable.
Yeah. So one of the interesting pieces, and you've alluded to it, and it's certainly a collaborative approach, but you as the mayor will have some authority and some kind of decision-making powers that impact the city exclusively. And so at some point in time, we'll get there. We're not there yet, and probably not reasonably soon. But how will you determine, what are the metrics or the announcement that you use to determine when the pandemic is over? And what will be your plan at that point? And do you have any items that you want to accomplish, like when this is over, everything else that we were going to do before? So what will you use to determine when that point in time is, and what are the plans after that point?
Well, a lot of places I could go on that one. I think you mentioned Bill Gates, who through the Gates Foundation has gained enormous knowledge and experience through work he's done previously about pandemics. He didn't call this one, of course, as far as the time goes and when it was going to hit. But yes, he's squarely seen the potential for a pandemic threat for a long time. And he's of the view that this won't be fully over until some period of time after we get the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
The vaccine could be a year off, it could be 2 years off. So contextually, and I guess that goes back to my observation about what the chair of the Federal Reserve was saying, if we, and so much of this relates to trying to be as smart as we can about sort of future tripping and planning. If you rely on a vaccine coming down and then being able to fund the mass production of it and get everyone vaccinated, and say it's a year, his point of view is that all of the essential economic structures were sound, unlike fundamental flaws in the structure during the Great Recession, 10, 12 years ago. So his view was that if we stay afloat through currency making and federal stimulus dollars for a period of time that's allocated properly in ways that keep business afloat, and a vaccine comes, he believes that there's the prospect that we will bounce back from this sooner than we might think, maybe a couple of years. And obviously there's going to be a downward turn, but it's not going to be like 10 years of the Great Depression. So he thinks if we can keep things floating through stimulus, and we get a vaccine sooner rather than later, that we can survive this longer term. You're probably wanting to know more about sort of the short term, but so in the complex of all this uncertainty, but looking at some things that are potentially hopeful, in the second half of this year, you get to do biennial budget planning. So much of the work as it relates to a city response is going to be reflected in the budget we create. And, we all heard the refrain about budgets, public budgets for governments are expressions of our values. And so we're going to have the immense challenge this year of making decisions about how we do reductions, how much of our reserves do we spend. All of it's going to relate to our perceptions about what's a likely time frame for when we come out of this thing. If it's a longer term recovery, then maybe we refrain from using more of our reserves now. We're in the good position of being in a healthy place. I give my predecessor, Mayor Kelly Linville, and previous councils credit for maintaining really healthy reserves. Their counterparts I know of in Western Washington cities, mayors who are having to deal with realities where they don't have those reserves. We have the good fortune of, we've, for instance, we've got about, I guess at this point, we've got about $15 million in unrestricted reserves in the city of Bellingham. How we deploy that and use that, cut into that, are going to be big questions.
And just to give people a reference point, the annual budget for the city is closer to 100 million, correct?
Well,
more than that.
The general fund is around 85, depending on some counts, but around 85, $90 million. That's the piece that pays for the vast majority of the 900 plus city personnel who basically run the essential public services in Bellingham.
Right. So that 15 million is only a very small percentage of the whole annual budget. And so just want to make that reference point.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, before I
that all in 1 year.
Right. Yeah, before I make it sound like our reserves are too healthy, they are healthy by our measures and our metrics, but one could imagine how quickly one could burn through that as well.
Right.
All by way of saying it's going to be a very active second half of this year as we engage in budget making, not only in a context of recession and a pandemic, but also the social unrest, which is going to put a lot of pressure on our councils to, I anticipate, there's going to be a lot of pressures to put money towards, among other things, more social services. So challenges galore.
Mm-hmm. And
We'll
so
do the best we can.
one of the things that I've noticed through our conversation, I know we're getting pretty close to time, so I want to be cognizant of your time, is you're an avid learner. You've already referenced two leaders on a national level that you've listened to and gained knowledge from. But I'm curious, and given this could be, maybe there are other national leaders, but who are the leaders and maybe local heroes during this pandemic that you see? And similarly, who are the leaders that you rely on most during this time? And that can be local and national, they could be political, they could be thought leaders. Who are your go-to during this time?
You know, there's so many people that would enter into my mind that I'm reluctant to even mention, because I go down the road of mentioning names and I'll realize afterwards that there are a bunch of names that,
Not an exclusive list.
yeah, there are so many heroes in this. The A lot of them are the obvious ones. I mean, the people that are the healthcare workers are all the frontline people. Uh, you know, the food security section at Unified Command. Maury Ingram's a name. But again, I just mentioned that name. There's so many people that are associated with it. The people at the food bank. You go down the road of even pulling out a subject matter, and immediately there's a ton others. That's just one example. But the people who are on the front line delivering all the various services right now are certainly, there's just a lot of people that have been working every day. A lot of people at the health department who are just, the health department, God, they're working hard. Yeah,
So,
but the people that I'm surrounded with on a day-to-day basis, everyone who's standing up really in these challenging times, and there's thousands of folks, but the ones who exercise patience in the context of so many opportunities to feel impatient. But I'm surrounded by a really great group of people at the city who I work with every day. When I became mayor, there were people out there that said, "Oh, you got to go in there and clean house." I was like, "No, I don't think so." And thank goodness I didn't. I am so impressed with the people that I work with at the city of Bellingham. I work closely with the executive team in the mayor's office. I work closely with the department heads, and we have regular meetings. The people that we partner with in what we call the operations group, the people that are associated, the emergency responders who are associated with working out at Unified Command. So there's a group of, if I had to boil it down, probably on a rotationally, probably, 20, 25 people that I have regular contact and I'm in meetings with daily, if not weekly, who are so good, so capable, that, as I said, they give me comfort. They're lots of C words. They're collaborative, competent. Couldn't do it without them, and truly has been a pleasure. We're local government, so cynically we get a lot of incoming, a lot of armchair quarterbacks, read stuff, expressing frustration, which I understand. But these people just patiently go about doing the work of delivering public services, and grateful to have them around me.
awesome. So my final question, I think we have time to maybe get to one Q&A. So I think today we're like day 109, 110 of of this pandemic, or at least local pandemic, where we shut things down. What, if you have one, what is your message to chamber members in our community?
Well, I guess I would go back to the rock and the hard place observation. And of course, we don't want it to be a rock and a hard place. We want to do the best we can. We want to remove the rocks and progress. And we have to maintain our health, and we have to open up the economy. I'm sympathetic to the people who dare, because you get criticized so instantly for even daring to raise the question of, and this goes to the observation, is our cure, worse than the disease? And that's like a huge question. I won't even venture into that, but we hear that question being raised. So a dead economy is going to presumably create, perhaps some would say, equal misery to the actual disease itself. And I get in trouble just raising that question. People jump on me very quickly for even having that conversation. So again, I won't have the conversation, but we've all heard that question raised. And
Neither of us are in a position to be able to answer that question either.
Right, yeah. So I guess the sort of splitting it, threading the needle just right, that's another analogy we use all the time. Threading the needle, walking through an explosive minefield often in this experience, where you have these three compounding crises. As Rahm Emanuel put it, we've got a 100-year pandemic, we've a 75-year recession, and we've got a 50-year civil unrest all happening at the same time. So the thing that I would venture is that we control our destiny to the very largest extent. We know the fundamental health protocols, the 3 W's, as some put it, wear a mask, wash your hands, watch your distance. We know that fundamentally, if we are disciplined in adhering to these things, we control our destiny. And we know that we can open business in a way where, if people adhere to these things, there's this direct correlation between our ability to be disciplined and committed to adhering to the basic health protocols and our ability to relax the restrictions and open things up so that our economy can work. And really, it's all going to come down to the degree to which we're successful in convincing everybody, including the youngsters, that they need to adhere to these things. And can we maintain, in the context of exhaustion, fatigue that we're already having after 3.5 months, in the prospect of this going on for potentially another year, can we get into some routine as a species, as humans? Can we patiently get into a habit where we adhere to the health protocols, all of us, and put pressure on people? However we do that, how do we convince people to engage in that behavioral requirement? But if we do that, we can open things up. And that's, I guess, what I see as the fundamental challenge. But if we can do it, then we can open up and hopefully save our economy.
Yeah. So we have one question, and it should be fairly easy question, but it's long, so I'm going to read it. Tourism, and so we mentioned downtown merchants, Fairhaven merchants, and I think we can kind of look at tourism, hospitality, restaurants, but tourism is a major economic driver. Visitors spend $555 million in 2019, employs over 7,400 jobs, and the state and local tax generator of just over 70 million annually in Bellingham and Whatcom County. Tourism has shed the greatest number of jobs of any industry here, and based on other black swan events like 9/11 and the 08 economic crisis, we know it'll take several years to make a full recovery. And you mentioned that in some industries as well earlier. Based on this and knowing how important tourism is to Bellingham's economy, are you willing to sit down with tourism industry stakeholders, hotels, restaurants, events, attractions, transportation providers, recreation, to discuss and help develop both the short and long-term strategies on how to allocate and assign available resources to support the industry now and through recovery? So basically do something like this, but very specific for tourism.
Yes, it would be my
Perfect.
pleasure and honor to do that. And
I figured that was going to be a short answer. So
yeah, no, I look forward to that. You know, I was on a CBC Canada Public Radio show, I don't know, some weeks ago. It's sort of the counterpart to public broadcasting here in Washington. And they wanted to just get the take on, you know, we're the biggest city in Whatcom County, closest to the border. So they were just wanting to know how things are going for us. And of course, fortuitously, the Westerns cross-border group had just come out with some updated stats right before that interview. And I learned a couple things from that. One, the reason that the border remains closed with Canada for most people is that opinion polls run in between 70 and 80% in BC supporting the closure, because they perceive that they hear all this national information, which is bleak. They conflate it to the local scene, and they conclude they can't come over the border because it's just a cesspool of plague infestation. So that feeds back to the previous question about if we're successful in adhering to protocols. But the stats that I was able to share with them are ones that you know about, and this relates to tourism. You know, $138 million spent annually from that cross-border exchange in our local region, $100 million of which are spent just in and around Bellingham. 7 million people coming down just annually. Just the tax benefits from that to local government, you know, it's huge. How many of them are, quote, tourists as opposed to just shoppers? You know, probably a smaller subset, but still substantial. So anyway, all by way of saying, I get the impact to the tourism. I know that I'm familiar with the projected just annual reductions that we're seeing in the tourist fund. It's massive. I will look forward to sitting down and meeting. I would ask you to reach out to Brooke Sana. She's my assistant. And her email is, well, I'll give you the...
I'll go ahead and shoot that. I know who asked the question, so I'll forward it to her.
Thank you.
So we are at our time. Thank you so very much, Mayor. Good luck, and we look forward to being a continued partner with your office and the city.
You're welcome. I'm sorry for my long answers. But I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye.